Hey everyone, so sorry that I couldn't be there with y'all today, but due to the beauty of technology, we can still learn about the synthesis essay. So hopefully at this point, everybody has circled up their chairs into kind of a discussion format, and you have a piece of paper and pencil or a laptop by which you can take notes because we'll be talking about the synthesis essay and also outlining the synthesis essay, and you can use this outline for the weekend to complete your writing. So let's move forward and talk about heat and drought in the US. So when we last saw each other, you guys focused on brainstorming for these 5 questions using the documents that were provided to you, and you will discuss these 5 questions today. So let's start with the first one. So what I'd like for you guys to talk about first is what arguments does the prompt allow? So when you return to the prompt, what are the different things that you could argue based upon the prompt? So go ahead, pause the video, and come up with the 3 different types of arguments you can make. Go for it. All right, welcome back. So let's see if you figured out the 3 prompts. So the 3 arguments rather. So you can either agree, qualify, or disagree. So what does that mean? So say you want to agree. You would then have a thesis that argues heat and drought is the biggest climate change problem facing the US. So that's one thing that you could argue. If you don't want to agree, but rather qualify, in your thesis, you might argue heat and drought is a problem that needs to be addressed in the US, but to a certain degree. So you're not having a total yes or a total no. You're saying yes and no. You're qualifying. And so in this argument, you need to explain to what degree you're arguing, and you need to explain how can we measure these degrees with the sources provided. And so that's qualifying. It's essentially, in simple terms, being somewhere in the middle. Or you can disagree. So if you disagree, you would be arguing heat and drought should not be a climate change problem addressed in the US. And there's 2 ways you could approach this. You could approach it by saying heat and drought is not a problem at all and arguing to support that. Or you might argue it's not a solvable problem. So it is a problem, but one that can't be solved for. And therefore you disagree with the prompt. So those are the 3 types of arguments that you could make. So what I'd like for you guys to do next is to go around and just quickly state what your position on the argument is. Don't offer a lengthy explanation or really any explanation at all because you're going to have time to do that. So in a moment, you'll pause the video and you'll go around and just really quickly, each person will either say agree, qualify, or disagree. So go ahead and pause the video and go around and do that. Okay, so now that we've shared your quick positions, let's move on. So once you figured out your position, that allows for you to write your introduction to your synthesis essay. And so here I have a quick outline of what an introduction might look like for your synthesis essay. So you want to start with a hook, and we have a nice hook that we covered in class, the ice steppas of LADOC. And so what you would write about is essentially how heat and drought is a problem affecting many places in the world, and you can use LADOC as an example, and how they use the solution of ice steppas to kind of help with this problem. And so that would be a really interesting hook to open up your essay. Then you would shift into the background and explain that just like in LADOC, they are struggling with heat and drought. Parts of the US are as well. So there's heat and drought in the US, and this heat and drought specifically affects cities and agriculture. Now, heat and drought is affecting many different parts of the US, but based upon the documents you've been provided, you probably notice that it's focusing on cities and agriculture. And with the synthesis essay, there's probably going to be lots of different things you want to write about, but for the sake of the synthesis essay on the AP exam, follow the pathway that they're building for you. If they give you a bunch of documents about cities and agriculture, don't go and write about, I don't know, the beach. You don't have any document that you could use to draw source information on beaches. So make sure to kind of follow the sources they give you. And in this case, it was cities and agriculture. So that's the background information I would provide. And then here's a thesis. So everybody's thesis is going to be different based upon the position that they've selected. I've selected a qualify one because it's the most complex of the three. And so I wanted to give you kind of the more complex example. But if you said agree or disagree, awesome, go for it. But this is a thesis example for qualifying. So it argues, while heat and drought will inevitably occur in the U.S., there are achievable solutions that will reduce negative effects on both cities and agriculture. And so that's the thesis. The qualification occurs where here, while right here with while heat and drought will inevitably occur in the U.S. is kind of the counter, the disagree, and then the rest of it is the agree. And you'll see that when we get into the opposition and position paragraphs. All right, cool. So let's scoot on. Now, before investigating our own opinion, what will be the opinion of your opposition? Explore what they will argue and why they might argue this. So go ahead, pause this video, and have some free discussion. Don't go around in a circle. Just talk for a little bit about not your opinion, but what you think your opposition might argue against you. And now if there are students in the class who directly disagree with you, you'll get to hear all sides, even though you're talking about the opposition. So it'll work out really nicely. All right, so go ahead, pause the video, and talk about what your opposition might think. Go for it. All right, now that you've talked about the opposition, let's talk about why. So in your synthesis essay, if you are qualifying, agreeing or disagreeing, you will have an opposition section. Now, if you're qualifying, it's not necessarily information that you disagree with, but it's showing one side of the coin, and then you'll talk about the other side of the coin. So regardless of whether you pick agree, qualify, or disagree, you'll still have something that essentially works as an opposition. So with the opposition, you'll have a topic sentence. Following the outline that I've already started, my topic sentence will say something along the lines of heat and drought will inevitably occur in the U.S. And you can see it is pulling from the first part of my thesis. So my opposition will cover the first part of my thesis, and it will restate it, not necessarily in exact words, because that's a little too formulaic, but it will somehow restate this initial part of my thesis in the topic sentence. Then I go on to using sources to support this opposition position. All right, so what does that look like? So when you guys were looking at your sources, I did have you highlight them. Now, I know highlighting isn't the best for everybody, but highlighting, underlining, bracketing is going to be important for a test-taking strategy when completing the synthesis essay, because if you don't mark important quotes while going over the sources for the first time, when you go back to write, you're going to have to reread all the sources again because you're not going to remember where the information was that you wanted. So when you're going through the sources, please make sure to mark them up so that you can easily find the quotes that you ultimately want to use in your essay. And that's why we're highlighting. It's not to help you memorize it. It's not a study tactic. It's just to stop you from having to read sources multiple times. So the sources that help me argue heat and drought will inevitably occur in the U.S. is source A, and I've had the highlighted information that would help me argue that. Source B, which is a visual source that I can draw upon to prove that statement. There's source C and the highlighted information that I can use there. And also, which source is this? I can't remember. It's not labeled. Oh, source D. So there's also information in source D. Now, I might not use all four of these sources. That's a lot of information to cover in one paragraph, but any of these four things I could use to prove my position. So if I'm arguing that heat and a drought will inevitably occur in the U.S., this talks about global warming effects on heat. This shows global warming effects on heat through kind of like visual data, so I can translate that into words. This one talks about daily temperatures in urban areas being higher, and this one talks about the resulting drought that's affecting crops and costing us a lot of money. And so what you'll notice here is this not only goes into the idea that heat and drought will inevitably occur in the US, but it also has this side purpose of further detailing the problem, the fact that this is going to cost us a lot of money. It's going to create a lot of damage. And so that's also, it gives my opposition a little more purpose than just kind of proving that it's like that heat and drought will inevitably occur. And so we have the sources. When you use your sources in your paragraph, please remember to use full quotes, breakout quotes, and paraphrasing. You want to vary the way that you are utilizing your sources. Please do not have every single source be a full quote. That is not a good idea. You will spend so much time writing down full quotes that you'll run out of time to actually write the essay. So really, you just want to have about one full quote, possibly two in the essay. But mainly you're going to want to be using breakout quotes and paraphrasing. Breakout quotes are nice and quick. Paraphrasing maintains your writing style, which is really good. So those are the two you primarily don't want to rely upon. When you are using your sources, please use tag phrases because it's a more sophisticated way to write. For example, if you don't know what a tag phrase is, you might write, according to Muskian, a writer for the Washington Post. This introduces my author and indicates his credibility. And then I would go into the quote from him. Even if you have this tag phrase, please include your in-text citation because that's how they'll be able to count how many sources you've used, because you have to use 3 different sources at minimum. So always include your in-text citations, and you can either do that by writing source A or the author's last name. Just be consistent as to which way you go. Now, my purpose in using these sources will be to prove my topic sentence. So I want to use the sources to prove that global warming will inevitably cause an increase in annual heat and drought. However, I will also argue that this inevitability should not result in fatalistic defeat. Rather, it should emphasize the need for immediate response. And so this is the argument that I'm going to prove through these sources. And I also have this side purpose of kind of further developing the problem. All right, so now that we have discussed the opposition, let's go ahead and think about your position now. So now explore your argument using info from the sources. Support your position as the degree of this problem in the US. To the best of your ability, reference the source you are using to argue your position. So essentially what I'd like for you to do is, again, have a natural discussion. Don't go around in a circle, but talk about the sources that you read. Just point out things that you thought were interesting. Point out things that you think would make a really strong argument. There's a lot of things to quote in these sources. Some things are better than others. So what are really good things that you could use in your essay? And talk about that. Help each other out. What should you be quoting? What should you be paraphrasing? Talk about it. All right, so now that you guys have talked about that a bit, let's move into the next question. So of the solutions provided in the resources, which should be implemented? All of them, only some, none of them? Can you think of better solutions that aren't even provided in the sources that you'd like to argue? So essentially what I'm trying to get at is, what are your position paragraphs going to be about? And so let's go into talking about outlining position paragraphs. So for the essay that I would be writing, and again, your essay may look nothing like this, but for my essay, when I look at my thesis, I know that the next thing I need to talk about are achievable solutions for cities. Oops. Achievable solutions for, draw please, cities. So my next paragraph, the topic sentence will be something along the lines of, there are achievable solutions that will reduce negative effects in cities, including blank and blank. And so there are so many things I could pull from the sources. So I'm just going to put blank and blank here because there are so many you could put in there. But I do know that I'm going to draw from sources C and E, and I'm going to use those sources to argue in support of how solutions, that should say just are worth investing in cities. And then when I move on to my next paragraph, it'll be about farms. And we know that to be the case because of the next part of my thesis up here. Notice how it matches in order. So my topic sentence, there are achievable solutions that will reduce negative effects on farms, including blank and blank. And I can use sources D, F, and G in order to argue in support of how solutions are worth the investment, and that should say in farms. All right, so that is ultimately the outline of the essay. So over the weekend, you guys need to go and write your own timed essay. Make sure to have a clear outline, but make sure to write it in only 45 to 50